On today's show, Jalen Green and the Houston Rockets going toe-to-toe with Ja Morant and the Memphis Grizzlies, a battle that pretty much went down to the wire in this game, despite Ja Morant dropping 49 points, almost a 50-piece for Morant. Jalen Green had a 30-piece. Alp added 20-plus off the Houston Rockets bench. The Rockets matched the intensity and the physicality of the Memphis Grizzlies, the best rebounding team in the association from last season. This was a high-scoring, high-octane affair between two very talented teams. We're going to break it all down for you coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start.
The Houston Rockets select Jalen Green and Jabari Smith Jr.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal.
Every time I step on that floor, I'm coming.
You're getting somebody who's going to come in with a chip on their shoulder, somebody who's going to come in and compete from day one.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays, host of the State of the Rockets podcast, as well as Rockets Watch. Be sure to follow along on Twitter at JT Gatlin, and the show, of course, at Locked On Rockets. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. We're also on YouTube. Just go to YouTube, search Locked On Rockets. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Today's question of the day: what did you like from Rockets Grizzlies? Tell me your favorite moments from this game. Tell me the things that were the most encouraging to you after seeing the Rockets go toe-to-toe with the number 2 seed from the NBA season last year. Now, today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered the season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. So many storylines to unpack from this game. The two that are probably the most important, though, are Jalen Green going absolutely toe-to-toe with Ja Morant, trading buckets throughout the entirety of this game, and a really explosive performance from Jalen Green. Future bench player Jalen Green, mind you, non-winning player Jalen Green, dropping 33 points in this one on incredibly amazing efficiency from the floor. And then Alperen Sengun basically staking his claim for earning that starting spot back potentially in this Houston Rockets rotation lineup, adding 23 points off the Houston Rockets bench. Unfortunately, Bruno Fernando did leave this game early. He had a little bit of left knee soreness, tightness. He kind of bumped knees with somebody at one point in the game, had to leave the game early. They checked him at halftime, and he just couldn't come back. So we also got our very first look at Jabari Smith at the 5 in this game. So a lot to unpack, but let's start with Jalen Green and his performance in this one, because he started out this game in a big way. This Rockets team jumped out to a 32-26 first quarter lead against the Grizzlies, and a big part of that was Jalen Green, who exploded for 14 first quarter points in this game. Was getting it done in a variety of ways. He couldn't miss from 3. He was 4 of 4 at one point from long distance before he finally missed his final 3-point attempt of the evening. 13 of 21 overall, was 3 of 4 at the charity stripe, had 5 boards, 2 assists, had a steal, just a couple turnovers. All in all, a really impressive night of work for Jalen Green. And he was really getting it done on the interior, which was really impressive. He was slicing and dicing through the Memphis Grizzlies defense like there weren't even guys there. At one point, he drove in from the top of the key, split through his defender on the perimeter, got through 2 guys in the paint, and then finished with this like twisting reverse lefty, or like right-handed lay-in, I should say, on the left side of the glass. He had another one in the first half where the Rockets were on the opposite end of the floor, and he drove into the Memphis Grizzlies defense, elevated, somehow contorted midair, and finished like this like circus shot, got it to touch off the glass and make the shot, and was fouled in the process, so got an and one out of it. Just a ton of great opportunities for Jalen Green. And then again, the 3 ball was falling for him. He was, again, 4 of 4. And when that 3 ball is falling for Jalen Green, it makes him incredibly hard to defend, incredibly hard to guard. And unfortunately, the same can be said for Ja Morant, who also had his 3 ball falling in this game, and he was also incredibly hard to guard. Jalen Green dropped 33, and then Ja Morant after seeing Jalen Green go for 14 points in the first quarter, taking a bit of an earlier rest than Jalen Green did, as Jalen and KPJ wound up playing the entirety of the first quarter, Ja Morant checked back in and he was like, all right, anything you can do, I can do better. And Ja Morant trotted out a stat line of 49 points on 17 of 26 shooting, was 5 of 6 from long range, 10 of 13 at the charity stripe, had 4 boards, 8 assists, 1 steal, 2 blocks, including I hate to say it, it was a really impressive chase down block on Jalen Green. Jalen had a couple of those where he was, he's got that insanely explosive first step where he can just, boom, get past his defender, and he's like right there at the cup, but sometimes he's just very exposed as far as just somebody else coming over from the weak side or coming up behind him and blocking a shot, and that happened a couple times in this game. I want to say Santi Aldama had one of them, or maybe it was Conchar. One of the other Grizzlies starters, it definitely wasn't Bane, so I've got to say it was Aldama or Conchar. I'm not sure which one. One of those guys had a from the side, behind the back block on Jalen Green as well. Ja Morant had the block in transition, which again was a highlight level play. It was a really impressive display of athleticism from Ja Morant. But this was just a really high octane, electric game between two of the premier scoring threats in the NBA. And the Grizzlies are a good defensive team, and the Rockets still managed to put up 122 points on them. And contrary to popular opinion, I mean, the Grizzlies had, scored 129 points. Ja Morant went for almost 50, not quite. Let this be a lesson that nobody scores 50 points on the Houston Rockets in the second game of the season. But it makes it so difficult, right? Alperen Sengun spoke about this post-game. Having Steven Adams out there setting these like brick wall screens and having to choose between tracking down Ja and cutting off his driving lane versus sticking with Adams and making sure that he can't get things going on the roll. They conceded way too much probably to Ja Morant. I probably would have liked to see them make somebody else beat you on the floor. But at the same time, it's so incredibly tough to defend Ja Morant when he's got the 3-ball going, because you can play back off of him, you can play drop, you can fight, you can go under screens, that kind of thing. But if you're going under screens to try and prevent the driving lanes and he's drilling threes at the clip that he was, again, 5 of 6 from 3-point range, what else can you do? It's like looking in a mirror as far as when we see Jalen Green and he's hitting his 3-pointers and it basically makes him look unguardable. That's Ja Morant, but one step up from Jalen Green, because Ja Morant's been doing this for a couple more years than Jalen, and he's a guy who was even in MVP conversations last season. So one, that's a glimpse into the future as to what Jalen Green might be able to kind of start putting together, the kind of terrors that he's going to inflict upon other teams further down the line. But I thought this was a really encouraging performance across the board. The number one thing that really stood out to me was this Grizzlies team is a really, really physical team. They are physical. They have a dominant presence. They have a lot of size. They were one of the best defensive teams in the NBA last season, and they were the best rebounding team in the league last season. The Rockets actually had the rebounding edge against the Grizzlies at halftime, 27-23. They were +4 on the boards at halftime. They didn't wind up holding on to that edge. The Grizzlies finished the game in the rebounding department 50-45, so they finished +5 compared to the Rockets. But the fact that Houston was right there, neck and neck with the Grizzlies as far as just competing for those boards, fighting hard on the glass, making their presence felt, matching the physicality and the intensity of this Grizzlies team. Yes, this is a Grizzlies team that's missing Jaren Jackson Jr. Yes, he is a big part of their defense and also their rebounding department. I get that. This is still a really encouraging sign, and there are many encouraging signs from this game and from the season opener against the Atlanta Hawks that point to this is just a different Rockets basketball team. This is a team that competes at a very high level against two of the best teams in the association, two teams that are likely going to be at their top of their respective conferences when it's all said and done this year, and the Rockets went out there and gave these two teams hell, like absolute hell. And that's got to be a really encouraging sign. There's context that matters in the form of these losses this season, to where as long as you're not getting blown out, if you're competing, if you're playing hard, and if you're a hard team to beat, then you got to take some solace in that. And you can't just look at the L in the win-loss column and be like, well, it was all for nothing. But do want to continue breaking down the other elements from this game. Want to talk about the center position in this game, because we got a really healthy look at Alperen Sengun, who was fantastic in this game. 23 points off the Houston Rockets bench in place of Bruno Fernando, who wound up leaving the game early due to left knee issues. We'll also take a look at Jabari Smith Jr., his impact on this game. All of that coming up in just a moment after a quick message from our friends over at BetOnline. The BetOnline.net is your number one source for betting football odds and the start of a brand new basketball season. Find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth analysis on every single game that you can get your hands on. Plus, BetOnline has you covered for UFC, MMA, boxing. They've got all the fighting odds. They've got everything you could possibly imagine over at BetOnline. Right now, you can go take a look at who are the odds-on favorites, I should say, to be this year's NBA Finals matchup. Right now, the Boston Celtics and the Golden State Warriors leading the way at plus 1600 favorites to be this year's finals matchup. Right behind them, you got the Celtics and the LA Clippers at plus 1700, the Bucks and the Warriors at plus 1750, and then rounding out the top five, you have the Bucks versus the Clippers at plus 1900, and then at plus 2100, the Brooklyn Nets versus the Golden State Warriors. So for all of those odds and more, be sure to head over to betonline.net to learn more about the trends in action available to you. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. We appreciate you making LOR your first listen today. For your second listen, go check out Game to Game NBA Western Conference. Every moment, every top performance, every result. Locked On Game to Game covers every game from across the NBA Western Conference with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Go follow Game to Game on Locked On NBA Western Conference, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you listen to your podcast, wherever you get this very podcast. Now, we got to focus on Alperen Sengun's performance here off the Houston Rockets bench. A big reason for why the Rockets were able to kind of match the physicality, the intensity of the Memphis Grizzlies in this very game, because Alp was fantastic in this game off the Rockets bench. He had 23 points on 9 of 13 shooting, 1 of 2 from long range. We'll get to the free throw shooting in a minute because it was pretty ugly. 12 rebounds, 5 of them on the offensive glass. He had 1 assist, 1 steal, 2 blocks, only 1 turnover. This was like a night and day performance from his first game against the Atlanta Hawks to this game, where he felt like his impact was there. I mean, he had impact in the Hawks game, but the turnovers were so painful to watch. 6 turnovers for Alp in the Hawks game. Really felt all kind of out of sorts offensively. This one, he felt like he was more in his bag and doing the things that he is comfortable doing. The playmaking wasn't quite there. It felt like when the Rockets were getting him the ball in his spots, it was with the express intent of him being a scoring threat and really running the offense through Alp at stretches just to get him, his own looks. And that worked out really, really well. Alp was in his bag in this game. Again, you really like the scoring from him, where if he can go 9 of 11, inside the 3-point line, that's damn near unstoppable for a big man playing against, again, a really good Memphis Grizzlies defense, playing against a Steven Adams, a large interior looming presence. Alp did a fantastic job this game. And I think the standout here is that even despite the Bruno injury, and despite the fact that the Rockets wound up playing the second half of this game without Bruno in the lineup, it very much appears that Stephen Silas is going to be kind of just going with whoever, not necessarily going with who has the hot hand between Bruno and Alp, but he's very much going to be playing Alperen Sengun in conjunction with the rest of the starters for stretches of the game. So even though Alp isn't starting the game, he's not the center jumping, at midcourt for the start of the game, whatever. He's not being announced with the other starters. Who cares? Alp is playing with the other starters, and he's getting a chance to play his game a little bit more than if he started the game and Jalen and KPJ are trying to get themselves going and they're playing their game and they're really reliant on the heavy screen and roll action and pick and roll play and trying to get downhill and all that stuff. Alp doesn't have to worry about that. He still has to play that role to an extent when he's sharing the floor with KPJ, with Jalen Green. But him coming off the bench allows him to play his game. And minus the turnovers against the Hawks, which again were frustrating, and minus the bad free throw shooting here, 4 of 10 shooting, not fantastic, he's had a pair of really solid looking games to start the season. And I'd argue that the production for him wouldn't be the same if he were injected into that starting lineup. Having him come off the bench does wonders for him. And I don't know if this is going to be I don't know if it's going to be a permanent thing, right? I don't know if he's going to get to a place where his performances are so much overshadowing Bruno Fernando and whatever production he's bringing to the table at the starting spot that the Rockets are just like, you know what? We'll throw Alp back in the starting lineup. Who knows? But at this point, the idea that Stephen Silas is able to kind of have Alp play minutes with both the starters and with that secondary bench unit, that is what I like the most, because it's not like Alp is just isolated to playing with exclusively the bench guys, to where he doesn't have the advantages of playing alongside a Jalen or a KPJ or an EG, right, or a Jabari. It's not like that whatsoever. In fact, the Rockets, Stephen Silas made an early substitution in the second quarter because his first pair of substitutions in the game were to bring in KJ Martin and Tari Eason, and he brought them in for Eric Gordon and Jabari Smith Jr. So, and then later on when Bruno Fernando made his first substitution out of the game, Alp comes in and he's getting a chance to play alongside Tari and KJ and Jalen and KPJ. And then as Stephen Silas starts switching out the lineups a little bit more, goes further into the bench with Garrison, with Josh, brings back EG to kind of help man the second unit. Jabari Smith Jr. checked in early in the second quarter so that he could get some reps alongside Alperen Sengun, because Stephen Silas understands that Jabari Smith Jr. can benefit from playing alongside a passing big and offensive hub like Alp. So it's a work in progress. The Rockets figuring out the lineups, the rotations, how they're going to stagger certain guys. Stephen Silas has talked repeatedly about the idea that he probably wants to stagger Jalen and Kevin Porter Jr. some so that they can spread out their scoring punch. But in this game specifically, he noted that he just really liked how they were playing together, especially through that first quarter. And so he kept them playing together, right? Rather than subbing one out and ruining the rhythm that they had, kind of messing up the flow of that first quarter where the Rockets looked really, really good. And I respect that, being able to kind of change the mentality that you had going into the game. Maybe you go into the game thinking, I'm going to do this, I'm going to pull this guy at X minute, right? But matching the flow and the tone of the game and deciding in the moment, you know what? I'm going to abandon the plan, the idea that I had coming into this game, and I'm going to go with what I think is going to work in the moment. So I respect that from Stephen Silas. That's what you've got to do as a coach. You've got to be able to roll with the punches and adjust accordingly. And in this game specifically, he decided not to stagger Jalen and KPJ. But as it stands right now, the fact that we're not seeing Jae'Sean Nix, possibly because he's been questionable due to the lower back spasms, who knows how serious that is, unfortunately. We haven't gotten an added update past the fact that he's missed the last couple games and he's been questionable a couple times. Ty Washington's out with a knee issue. The Rockets don't have a legitimate backup point guard on the roster, so they're kind of doing it by committee right now with Eric Gordon and with Alperen Sengun in that secondary unit. Josh is handling the ball a little bit. Once Jae'Sean Tate gets back, he'll be able to shoulder a bit more of that secondary unit playmaking load. But until then, staggering KPJ and Jalen Green is something that I would absolutely love to see, because then you have a kind of a primary ball handler, because Jalen can be that. He's better than anybody else on the roster at being that, at least running the offense through him, not necessarily as a one or as a primary creator, but at least somebody to just give the ball to and say, hey, everything's going to run through you, and it's going to look pretty good if you do that. I'd like to see him stagger those two guys. And it's unfortunate that we haven't seen it quite just yet, because I'm very over the idea of Eric Gordon running things in the second unit for this Houston Rockets team. I'm not a fan of it. I've never been a fan of it. He can do it situationally, but Eric Gordon is very much a secondary creator. Putting him in a primary creator role does not ever look fantastic, unfortunately. In fact, in this game, Eric Gordon had 4 turnovers himself. So as far as that is concerned, I do want to see them kind of stagger that. But again, that's dependent on when and if they can get Jae'Sean Tate back into the lineup, back into the rotation. The other side of things at the center position was none other than Jabari Smith Jr. We got our first look at him as the 5 in this game. We'll take a look at what that did for the Houston Rockets, playing Jabari Smith Jr. at the 5. We'll take a look at some of the other not so great storylines from this game. Unfortunately, I've highlighted some of the positives that we've seen throughout this game against the Memphis Grizzlies. Want to talk about some of the frustrating things that we noticed on the floor as well. We're going to get there in just one moment. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Let's talk a little Jabari Smith Jr. here to kind of wrap things up from this game. Jabari, 10 points, 3 of 14 shooting, 2 of 8 from long distance, 2 of 2 at the charity stripe, only 1 rebound, kind of curious, 1 assist, 2 blocks, should have been 3 blocks, should have been 3. He had 1 taken away from him by the officials that looked upon replay to be pretty clean, although I think he smacked somebody across the hand with his offhand. I digress. Jabari's game in this one, there are 2 things that I want to highlight. So first off, we got to see Jabari Smith Jr. playing at the 5 spot, so we'll talk about that in a second. The main thing, though, is I don't think the Rockets again, in the Hawks game, it felt different. In this game, though, Jabari didn't attempt his first shot from the floor until 8 minutes into the second quarter. Or sorry, at the 8-minute mark of the second quarter, so 4 minutes into the quarter. To me, that is wholly unacceptable. You can't have Jabari go through his entire first stint of the floor and not get a single shot up offensively. I just don't see how you do that, right? And that, to me, is an indictment of KPJ and Jalen Green and their ability to orchestrate the Rockets offense. They need to get guys better involved offensively. The Rockets had 18 assists on 44 made shots. That's not good enough. Like, I don't like that number. I want that. No, those are bad numbers. We want that number up. I want more assists on made field goals. And for Jabari specifically, he's a guy that relies on other guys to feed him the basketball, right? He relies on other guys to initiate the offense, kind of break things down, and then kick the ball out to him. And he got a decent number of opportunities in this game, but I'm frustrated by it because from his standpoint, right, get him the ball a little bit earlier, right? Let him get loose. Let him get a couple shots up early in the game. And there were so many opportunities in this one where Jabari was wide open on the wing or wide open in the corner, and those simple reads, those skip passes from Jalen and from KPJ aren't being made to get him the ball when he's wide open, to the point where some of his shots were contested, right? Where some of his shots weren't wide open because they're missing the times when he is wide open, when the defense isn't recognizing the rotation, when they're not picking him up in transition, different areas like that. So for Jabari, I definitely want to see him be more involved earlier in the Rockets offense and what they're trying to do rather than just, and look, I know Jalen had it going in the first quarter. He had 14 first quarter points. Things look really, really good. But at the same time, you've got to share the love, right? You've got to get other guys involved. And even to a point, this is also a bit of an indictment on Alperen Sengun, right? Alp is the baby Jokic, passing god, wizard, whatever you want to call him. He only had 1 assist this game. And Alp was very much looking to just score when he got the ball. He wasn't really looking to facilitate the way that he normally does. And maybe that was a directive from the coaching staff. Maybe we're like, hey, go in there, get your buckets. We're going in with the idea that we want to post you up, not necessarily, have you post up and look to feed other guys off you. Who knows, right? But I don't like the lack of involvement for Jabari through the first 16 minutes of this game. It's unacceptable to me that he didn't get his first shot attempt till 16 minutes in, and his second stint on the floor. Now, the flip side is, with Bruno Fernando leaving the game early and not coming back, the Rockets got a look at Jabari Smith Jr. playing the 5 spot. And when I asked Stephen Silas postgame about what he was looking to achieve with Jabari Smith Jr. at the 5 spot, he basically talked about the fact that with Steven Adams in the game, he really thought that they could capitalize on the ability to utilize Jabari's pick and pop, right? To get him in, to get Steven Adams in the pick and roll and to have Jabari popping out to the perimeter and try to open things up that way. And it worked a couple times. Like, it didn't, it wasn't fantastic. And then I think, in the stretches where Jabari was defensively, where he was the 5, things looked okay. They didn't look great. He didn't get completely clobbered on the glass by Steven Adams. He wasn't out there ragdolling him around. But this to me would not have been the matchup where I would have thought, all right, let's throw Jabari into the deep end and you're going to be matched up against Steven frickin' Adams the first time that you play 5 at the NBA level. So we got a brief glimpse at it. It is frustrating that the Rockets have continued to play a pick and roll defensive scheme where they're dropping Jabari Smith Jr. because I think one of his skill sets, right, is being able to blitz pick and rolls, being able to stunt or being able to switch. And he's got that versatility in his bag. But Stephen Silas spoke about it post game and basically said, we haven't gotten to that level of our defense yet of how to blitz with Jabari at the 5, which I guess is situationally different than blitzing with him at the 4 or switching with him at the 4. But at the same time, the principles should roughly be the same, so I don't know why that's such a tough concept to grasp, to where you've got a versatile defender in Jabari Smith Jr. Why not do things to make life a little bit more difficult on the opposing team, especially when you've got Ja Morant carving you up to the tune of 49 points? Just try something, right? Just go out there and say, all right, let's start blitzing Ja. Make somebody else beat you. I don't know. It's, to me, that screams a little bit of a lack of maybe creativity as far as just defensively sticking to, all right, we're only doing drop coverage. We're going to keep letting Ja carve it. I don't know. It's just frustrating watching an opposing player go off for that many points against your team. And it is Ja Morant. He's impossible to guard. So especially when he's hitting that 3 shot that we talked about earlier. But a couple different looks at Jabari Smith Jr. again at the 5. His involvement within the Rockets offense. He's getting some decent looks. The shot distribution felt a little bit different this time around. Jalen, KPJ still very much leading the pack, but then a bit more of an even spread between EG, Jabari, and then Alp off the bench in this one, whereas against the Hawks, it was very clearly Jalen, KPJ, and Jabari were like the three main focal points of the offense, with each one of those guys getting roughly 20 shot attempts each. So the shot distribution a little bit different here in game 2, matching a little bit more, I think, what Steven Silas kind of wants, with EG getting a few more shots, Alp still getting his fair share of shots off the bench, and then Jabari getting a steady dosage of shots. And it's worth noting that Jabari had a stretch there in the fourth quarter where he had a pair of back-to-back possessions in the fourth where he drilled a three-pointer, and then on the very next possession, he caught the ball at the top of the key, went one-on-one, had a one-dribble pull-up where he just great footwork, body control, dribble pull-up to his left hand, elevated, knocked down the shot above, over the top of the defender, high release point, all of that. And it looked very Chris Middleton-esque when he did it. And it's like moments like that where you see Jabari Smith Jr. put together, a move like that where you're like, okay, all right, I can see how this guy's going to be a tremendous force further down the line, because if he can have that in his bag, like a go-to 1-2 dribble pull-up move that nobody can defend because he's ridiculously tall and has the insanely high release point, then you couple that with his defensive prowess, you couple that with his three-point shooting, his willingness to attack the basket that we've seen through a couple games already. I mean, this kid's going to be the truth further down the line. So, and then the rebounding side of things, I don't necessarily want to say that like the rebounding was a red flag in this one. I just think he was out of position to get some of these boards. And the team, as a team, the Rockets did a fantastic job rebounding. I mean, KJ Martin had 5 boards, Tari Eason had 7, Jalen had 5, Scoot had 5, EG had 4, Bruno Fernando had 4 before getting sidelined. So even though Jabari walks away with just 1 rebound, I don't think it's because he wasn't trying to rebound or he's a bad rebounder or any of that. I think that just the boards were just not bouncing his way in this game. And that's okay. Like, he doesn't have to get the boards for us to think that he is, an effective presence defensively. There we go. Words are hard. Final couple throw-ins from this game. Steven Silas did, I basically brought up the fact that, I mentioned this in segment 1, but the fact that the Rockets did a fantastic job in the rebounding department, the fact that they competed at a very high level with the Memphis Grizzlies. And so I got a chance to ask Steven Silas about what his thoughts were on kind of the rebounding battle and how much of an encouraging sign it was. And he actually gave an even better answer than I could have hoped for.
They had 50 rebounds. You guys finished with 45. How encouraging of a sign is that for, going against a team that led the NBA in rebounding last season to be able to match that intensity, that physicality?
There's a lot to be proud of for this game. I mean, we scored 122 points against a very good defensive team. We were right there with the rebounds, 45 to 50. They made 19 threes and we made 16 threes. If we would have made some of our free throws, we'd have been right in the game. So I'm not discouraged at all about this. I'm encouraged because we took a team who is one of the top teams in our conference, and they felt good about beating us because we played so hard. And you could hear them, down the hallway like it was a playoff game. Like they really had to put a lot into it to beat us. And that's one of the things. We want to be a team that's hard to play against. And we were tonight. We were very hard to play against. So, yeah, the 45 to 50 rebounds, they got some of the offensive rebounds that were bouncing around and were 50-50 balls I wish we would have gotten. But I think we can all in this room and whoever else is watching see that this team is much better than anybody thinks we are.
Thanks, Coach.
I love that quote from Steven Silas. This team is much better than anybody thinks we are. And I think that's the truth going into the season. I think that's the story of this Houston Rockets team this year. And I think that's going to continue to be the story as we navigate this season, is this Rockets team is going to surprise a lot of people. And yes, they started out the season 0-2, but you have to look at the context of these losses. They're not blowout losses. They're not games where you're sitting there thinking, man, this Rockets team sucks, or they're an easy out, or they're just rolling over and let the other team beat them. They're tanking. No, this is a competitive team with a lot of talent, and they're trying to find the right ways to piece it together right now. And so far, I'm really encouraged by the signs that we've seen out of this team. They've got certain areas they need to clean up still. Absolutely. They're a young team. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to have lapses. They're going to have issues. We saw at the very end of this game that things broke down when the Rockets desperately needed a bucket. Jalen couldn't get anything. KPJ couldn't get anything, and it wound up turning into an Alperen Sengun, should have been an Alperen Sengun three-pointer, turned into an Alperen Sengun dribble drive Euro step that was like nowhere near the mark. And that was a frustrating moment in this game, right? That was a breakdown in the Rockets' late game execution. That's okay. That's a learning moment. That's a teachable moment for these young guys. And so Stephen Silas is going to take the film from this game. He's going to take the film from the Atlanta game. He's going to sit down. He's going to show these guys where they can improve, where they can get better. And this team is going to get better as the season progresses. And eventually we're going to start seeing some of these really close, hard-fought games against good, talented teams swing the Rockets' way, right? Some of those 50-50 balls are going to go the Rockets' way. And we're going to be talking about some wins instead of some losses. So with that, that's going to do it for today's episode. As always, appreciate you for checking out the show. If you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to your podcast. That's Apple, Spotify, Google, Odyssey app, free and available on all podcast platforms. We're also on YouTube. Go to YouTube, search Locked on Rockets. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Go answer our question of the day for today's episode. What were you most encouraged by in this game against the Memphis Grizzlies? What did you enjoy most about this game? Let me know in the YouTube comments. I do read each and every one of those every single day. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked on Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.